Many of us have a film that we weren't really a big fan of the first time we saw it, but it grew on us over time, and we've come to like it more and more each time we watch it. When it comes to Marx Brothers films, some fans have said for them that movie is Go West or Love Happy, but for me, it is definitely the next one on my ranking list, 1939's At the Circus. At the Circus has some very tedious moments. Kenny Baker, no, not R2-D2 Kenny Baker. Kenny Baker and Florence Rice are pretty lame as juvenile romantic leads. It has a huge slapstick finale that's really corny and doesn't really wrap up the film very well. It has a couple routines that go on a little too long, and some of the musical numbers are about as tedious as they come. And as a kid, this film didn't resonate with me very much. But as an adult, I've really come to enjoy At the Circus, and I feel like I was maybe a little cruel to it when I was younger. First of all, to get it out of the way, At the Circus has the best musical interlude of all the Marx Brothers films. Groucho Marx's rendition of Lydia the Tattooed Lady, and honestly, this movie is watching for that scene alone. He and the other brothers and many of the extras do this really elaborately and fun choreographed dance. Groucho is into it, so much so it became one of his signature songs. He did it live on the Dick Cavett Show. He did it live in other personal appearances. It is absolutely a showstopper, easily the best musical moment in a Marx Brothers film. And actually this has Chico's musical highlight too. His rendition of the Beer Barrel Polka on piano is, I think, his best piano number of all the Marx Brothers films as well. Very fun to watch. And those two moments are perfect. We also have some really good supporting cast members. Fritz Feld pops up briefly as Jardonnet, the great composer, to which Groucho remarks he's head of a dope ring, and he's the head dope. That kind of thing. Margaret Dumont appears, and she brings her usual class and poise and perfection to her role. Jerry Marin, who had a very tiny role on Seinfeld as Mickey Abbott's father-in-law, he was also a Munchkin in The Wizard of Oz. He pops up briefly as Professor Adam, and there's a really good comedy routine with him involving Chico passing out cigars that's worth seeing. And Nat Pendleton returns from Horse Feathers way back in 1932. We'll get to Horse Feathers here a little bit later in our ranking. He has a fun role as Goliath the Strongman. And there are some good gags involving him, particularly with Harpo, that are worth watching too. So At the Circus doesn't have a really strong identity of its own, and barring a couple of the songs like Lydia the Tattooed Lady, it tends to be kind of forgotten because it doesn't have like a really good routine that has permanently made itself part of Marx Brothers lore. But you can have a good time with it still. If you can look past, again, Kenny Baker and Florence Rice doing this very tedious number, Two Blind Loves, which is a good excuse to hit fast forward, I would say. But if you can get past some of that stuff and some of the nonsense at the end, there are some good parts to it. You can have a lot of fun with it. It definitely feels more innocuous and childish, I'd say, than many of their other films from the 30s do, but this could be a good movie to use to introduce young people to the Marx Brothers and to their films. Now, again, that didn't work for me as a kid, but I could maybe see it working for others. It's fun, it's simple, it's nothing that's going to change your life like some of the higher ranking films on this list, but you can still have a pretty good time with At the Circus. Usually I don't have too many controversial takes on my channel, but this will be one that most Marx Brothers fans probably will find a big controversy. My next pick on my ranking, from 1938, Room Service. Room Service is very unusual amongst Marx Brothers films because they took a play, you might say a play, the Marx Brothers have done lots of plays, and some of them were even adapted to films. But they took this play and made it into a movie, but the odd thing was, it wasn't a Marx Brothers play originally. They rewrote it for a Marx Brothers vehicle. Now this isn't unheard of in the 30s. Laurel and Hardy popped up in several different operas, for example, so taking a previously existing property and making it into a vehicle for a comedy team isn't as terrible, I think, as some Marx Brothers fans want you to believe. It's an odd choice for the group for sure. Indeed, one character had to be rewritten as Italian, to help out Chico, and one is a mute to help out Harpo. But at the end of the day, Room Service is a really interesting and unique Marx Brothers film. Today it's probably best remembered for having Lucille Ball in a supporting part. She doesn't really get a lot of funny material to do. She has a couple good scenes where she pretends to be a nurse, and she has good chemistry with Groucho. Indeed, famously, Harpo would later appear on I Love Lucy in support of her, and in a very funny episode. But Room Service, I kind of like that it's a little bit different. It's very plot-driven, which is unusual for a Marx Brothers film, and it delivers on its plot, too. Groucho is this kind of shyster producer, desperately trying to get this play produced, even if it means taking advantage of everybody else around him. Harpo and Chico, of course, helping him out, and Frank Albertson, long before he was in Psycho, pops up as the young playwright who's come from the small town to the big city and quickly finds out exactly what big city life is all about. But he's pretty good too, and interestingly is paired with a very young, and I mean very young, Ann Miller as kind of the female lead. But they do a nice job. You know, a fun cast. Charles Holton pops up, and of course Donald McBride gets the most famous line in the whole film, "Jumping Butterballs," which you have to see, I think, to fully grasp the context of that line. But I kind of like Room Service because it's different. You know, there are still plenty of Marx Brothers-like moments involving chasing a turkey through their hotel room, for example, in an attempt to slaughter it for lunch. Harpo pretending to have an incurable disease and later pretending to commit suicide is played for some kind of weird dark comedy laughs that honestly work pretty well. There are no big musical numbers to drag things down. There is a really fun rendition of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, which again sort of falls into that dark comedy bit there, but I think it works pretty well in the context of the film. Now, needless to say, it was, again, rewritten for the group, so Groucho gets a few extra lines and stuff. And interestingly, the original play, as far as I know, has never been adapted directly for a film. There was a musical version in the 40s featuring Frank Sinatra called Step Lively, which I've never seen, but I've heard is pretty bad. But a lot of people don't like Room Service, but I think it's a really fun change of pace. It's got some interesting ideas, and it's kind of nice to see the brothers play in this sort of structured story. Of course, we know the Coconuts and Animal Crackers were direct adaptations of the brothers' successful starring Broadway vehicles, and ideas from other stage productions they'd done would pop up in Monkey Business and Horse Feathers. But this is really, as far as I know, the last time the brothers were doing a play for film. And it's an interesting bit there to see them kind of again in this story that doesn't allow them to go completely crazy. I'm sure production was a little difficult. It doesn't sound like anyone involved was really enthusiastic about the product, but at the end of the day, I think it's a fun movie, and I think Room Service is often criminally overlooked just because it's different. Does it mean yes? No. Does it mean no? Well, yes and no. It's Così Cosa from A Night at the Opera, the next film on my list. A Night at the Opera is an absolute must-watch for Marx Brothers fans, and indeed we're entering kind of the god tier of their movies. Now, A Night at the Opera at this particular position might seem a little low for some people. For many Marx Brothers fans, it's their favorite. But A Night at the Opera is, you know, about opera, and that can make parts of the film a little tedious. But at the end of the day, there are so many great routines and great musical bits that, honestly, even if you're not an opera person, you can definitely overlook them and have a great time with this film. If you ever have to sign a contract, always look for the sanity clause. Of course, we know there isn't actually a sanity clause. But nonetheless, A Night at the Opera has a terrific supporting cast. Margaret Dumont, Sig Ruman pops up in his, I would say, least villainous of all of his roles. Robert Emmett O'Connor is in it. He's really good too. I wish he'd done more films with the Marx Brothers. We have one of the villains from Go West popping up here as well, Walter Wolf King as the arrogant, wicked Lespari, the opera singer who wants to get the girl but doesn't deserve her, and Alan Jones making his first of two Marx Brothers co-starring appearances as the romantic lead. Songs like Alone might feel a little bit tedious to today's audience, but Alan Jones and Kitty Carlisle's duet is indeed worth watching. It's a very beautiful song. Kitty Carlisle later remarked that that song in this film seemed like all she was ever really remembered for, which is a shame too, because she had a very long career. But nonetheless, she's quite good in this. I can readily see why most people, myself included, identify her with this film right away. Night at the Opera has great moments from all three of the brothers. Alan Jones bounces off them really well. Besides the Sanity Clause routine, we have the hijinks at the Opera House, and we also have the famous stateroom scene. How many people can you cram into the world's tiniest room? Definitely worth watching, especially with eggs. Make that 2 hard-boiled eggs. At the end of the day, At Night at the Opera is filled with so many iconic moments. You know, it's been reviewed by so many people, there's really nothing new I can say about it, but definitely a must-watch for the group. Not my favorite film from the Marx Brothers, but again, it made it this high on the list, and it's one that I can't recommend enough. If you can look past some of the tedious opera singing moments, I think you can have a really good time with it. And like at the Circus, this could serve as a good introduction for people just getting into their movies. So again, check this one out if you haven't already, because I think you'll like it.